Good morning. I'm going to call this hearing to order and welcome to our witnesses, Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, CIA Director Bill Burns, FBI Director Chris Wray, Director of National Security Agency and Commander of U.S. Cybercom, General Paul Nakasone, and DIA Director Lieutenant General Scott Berrier. Thank you all for coming before the committee today to discuss the intelligence community's annual worldwide threat assessment. This is an opportunity for agencies to brief this oversight committee and, most importantly, the American public about the numerous threats and challenges facing our country. Our nation's intelligence professionals are America's eyes and ears. They provide crucial intelligence assessments and warnings to policymakers so that we might address not just immediate threats, but dangers on the horizon. I'd like to thank you and, importantly, the thousands of men and women of America's intelligence community whom you represent for their quiet, unsung, and often unacknowledged service. I think we all know, and we see this on a daily basis, we live in an increasingly challenging and complex world. While the ongoing war in Ukraine has shown that conventional military capabilities are still important, I think the very nature of national security is undergoing a profound transformation. National security in 2023 is not the same as it was in 1993, for that matter, in 2003. We can no longer just pay attention to who has the most tanks, airplanes, or missiles. We also need to focus on technology, R&D dollars, strategic investment flows, and supply chains, because whoever leads and wins the challenges in technology domains will have an edge in national security competition in the future. We've already seen this with the outsized impact of cyber tools, which now give both state and non-state actors alike the power to cripple countries' critical infrastructure and entire economies from behind a keyboard without firing a single shot. And we're increasingly seeing rising competition in the technology space with authoritarian regimes that are challenging democratic norms at home and around the world. The People's Republic of China under President Xi and the Chinese Communist Party is now, unfortunately, a near-peer competitor with our country in its economy, technology, and military capabilities. And I think it is more important than just political correctness to emphasize, at least in my mind, our beef is with Xi Jinping, the Communist Party, and their authoritarian tendencies. It is not with the Chinese people. It is not with the Chinese diaspora. It is not with Chinese Americans or Asian Americans, who oftentimes have been the strongest critics of the increasingly authoritarian regime of the Xi government and are often victims themselves of CCP's repression. While America was focused for 2 decades on counterterrorism, China was racing to overtake the United States in a range of emerging and foundational technologies, such as advanced wireless communications, semiconductors, quantum, synthetic biology, and next-generation energy, as well as taking not only the extraction but the processing of rare earth minerals that are so critical in so many of those technologies. The PRC has also become an active player in the international technology standard-setting bodies and is embedding itself in global supply chains. All of this is why the United States must aggressively invest in talents, tools, and research to lead in tomorrow's technologies. Today, you will undoubtedly be asked about the IC's assessment on the origins of COVID-19. Let's be clear. Despite China's denials, it is entirely fair for us to ask whether the virus that has killed at least 6.8 million people so far might have been accidentally released from a lab in Wuhan. That these questions are even necessary is a testament to the failings of the Chinese system and stands in contrast to the openness of our own public health officials during the pandemic. The lack of transparency in China's authoritarian systems may mean that we will never be absolutely certain where COVID-19, or God forbid, the next pandemic, could have or will next originate. Looking towards Russia, we are now in the second year of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The IC, and I'm going to commend so many of you, did an incredible job of predicting Putin's plans and issuing warnings about the invasion, declassifying and sharing intelligence in a timely way, and I know for many of you that was totally against your grain, but making that declassification in a timely way, I really think upended Russia's plans and kept Putin off his game. Over the last years, Ukrainians have displayed resolve, bravery, resourcefulness as they have defended their country against Russia's ruthless invasion. NATO is more united than ever, and democracies around the world have rallied with unprecedented assistance to Ukraine in training, intelligence sharing, humanitarian, and modern military equipment. I hope that we'll hear from the IC assessment of the trajectory of this bloody conflict and what we think the end game will be, while at the same time obviously maintaining Ukraine's right to exist as a sovereign nation. I'm sure that we will discuss the multitude of other threats, from rogue states like Iran and North Korea, to emerging global health threats, to the threat of global warming, as well as the threats presented to the IC's workforce by anomalous health incidents, or AHIs. All of your agencies rely on world-class talent of your workforce, and that's why this committee will continue our efforts to ensure on federal clearance reform, security clearance reform. Hiring and retention is so important to make sure we maintain that world-class workforce. Last thing to note, and I think I speak for everyone on both sides of the aisle on this committee, we still have unfinished business regarding the classified documents that we need to see in order for this intelligence committee to effectively oversee its job on intelligence oversights. We must resolve this issue soon. The challenges we face are more varied and dynamic than ever, and clearly you all have your hands full. But we also have, I think, in this hearing, particularly for the public part, a chance to underscore conviction in our values and our efforts to reinvigorate our allies around the world, and to be clear-eyed about the threats that authoritarian regimes like China and Russia place. So I look forward to today's discussion, and with that, I'll turn it over to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming in here today. You know, for 2 decades after the end of the Cold War, our country, the United States, was the world's sole superpower. And that gave us the luxury to hope for a world in which Russia and China were coming into convergence with the values that of the free world. And I think also gave us the luxury of entertaining this fantasy that somehow free trade and globalizing the economy would produce peace, prosperity, and prevent nation-state rivalry. And that brief period of time between the end of the Cold War and very recently was a historic anomaly. The truth is that if you look at 500 years of geopolitics, it's been defined by great power competition. And that's where we find ourselves once again. It's clear there's not going to be any convergence of values. It's clear that globalization led to the rise of China, but it also deindustrialized America, created long and vulnerable supply chains. It eroded our middle class. It left our society deeply divided along socioeconomic lines. And we now find ourselves in a new world. One divided between the free nations, led still by America, an authoritarian and tyrannical bloc led by Beijing, and then dozens and dozens of developing countries that are leveraging both sides against each other on issue after issue to cut the best deal for themselves. So today, what we gather here, as we do once a year, to discuss the worldwide threats facing our country. And those threats, there are no shortage of them. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, global terrorism, narco-terrorists operating just right off and across our border and even in the homeland. All these are very serious threats. But it is my view that the greatest threat facing America is not another country. It is whether or not we have the ability and the willingness to accurately assess and appropriately adapt our foreign and domestic policies in this time of historic, revolutionary, and disruptive technological, social, economic, and geopolitical changes. The answer to that question is not just going to determine the direction of our country. The answer to that question will define the 21st century. And on this matter, I believe that the intelligence community has a critical and vital role to play. First, because the changes we must make will have to overcome complacency, bureaucratic resistance, opposition from interest groups who benefit from the status quo, and frankly, public discomfort with the consequences of some of the changes we're going to need to make. Complacency because we've relied on our power advantages and we've forgotten what it's like to live in a world where we have near-peer competitors. Bureaucratic resistance because our government, frankly, the commentary class, think tanks, academia, to some extent even Congress, is still filled with officials who came of age in the post-Cold War fantasy about the end of history. Opposition from powerful interests because multinational corporations that dominate and have consolidated some of our most important industries are deeply invested in foreign supply chains and in the current state of the global economy. And public discomfort, frankly, because we've become a society addicted to cheap products from China and viral videos on TikTok. Overcoming all this will only be possible if we can motivate policymakers and convince our citizens of the need to act on at least 5 distinct areas of great power competition and potentially great power conflict. It's a military competition, one in which we can no longer rely on overwhelming advantages to deliver relatively quick success. It's a diplomatic and political competition for influence in multilateral institutions and over important and entering into and maintaining important international alliances. It's an economic and industrial competition over critical industries, supply chains, access to resources, the flow of capital. It's a scientific and technological competition on areas ranging from precision medicine, artificial intelligence, cyber, the digital economy, quantum computing, control over valuable personal data, and protecting innovation and intellectual property. And it's an informational competition involving closed and controlled societies dedicated to using our openness to divide us against each other here at home and drive disinformation to further their narrative and undermine our standing in the world. In the 21st century, providing policymakers information on these areas of competition and understanding how they intersect with one another is a vital and critical national priority. And only our intelligence agencies have the resources and the broad-based insight needed to provide this. Intelligence work today is not just about collecting state secrets and protecting our own. It is now also increasingly about the important analysis of what all of these factors mean tied together, so that we, as policymakers, can decide what matters and what doesn't, so that we can prioritize the urgent over the important. Getting this wrong is the single greatest threat facing our country, and getting it right, the single most important task we have at hand. So I hope we can hear in this open setting how each of the agencies represented here today is adjusting to this historic challenge, because we simply have no time to waste. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.